Shop the Sherwin-Williams July Summer Sale and get 30% off paints and stains July 18th through the 28th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
He's retired from the Rhode Island State Police. He's also chief of police for Middletown Police Department in Rhode Island. He taught at Rogers University. He's talking about investigating a mafia hit and an FBI task force for money laundering.
Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, their realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. If you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, simply contact us. It couldn't be easier. You can send us a message on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show page, or email jay@letradio.com. That's Jay @letradio.com. Calling us from Rhode Island, we have Anthony M. Pesare on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He's got a storied career. He's retired major from the Rhode Island State Police. He's also retired chief of police for Middletown Police Department. He teaches at Roger Williams University, and he's also an author. His latest book is called Back in the Game. His website is anthonymPesare.com. That's spelled Pesare.com. The rest is common spelling. Just do a Google search for Anthony M. Pesare. I'm sure you'll find it. Anthony, A, thanks for your service. B, thank you for being a guest on the show and talking about it. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, John. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm anxious to share my story. As many of us in law enforcement have a story, and mine's kind of the same, but in many ways it's pretty unique.
And first of all, and you're right about that. That's part of the reason why we started this show. I'm retired from the Baltimore Police Department, and for a long time, police departments across the United States have relied on the news media to tell their stories, and they've always done a bad job. They've done a horrible job. The classic example I give is an officer was shot, but the good news is they'll recover from their injuries. They don't talk about how it affected their family. They don't talk about the troubles, trials, and tribulations they go through to get back to work or are retired. Secondly, it's about a platform for people to tell their stories from their perspective. It's not free. It's free from as much bias as possible. And two topics that one is the FBI has a lot of political bias about that nowadays. The other one is the mafia. And what we think of the mafia, and this part of the story, is often driven by what we see on television. And quite often, they get that wrong too, I suspect.
Yes. So what happens in a lot of the movies and television series is the mob, organized crime gets romanticized, and people think that it's a glamorous life, that it's fraught with danger, but they believe it's benign when actually it affects our lives. It affected my life and everyone's life in some form or fashion. So I grew up in an Italian-American neighborhood in Providence, Rhode Island, and I used to see mobsters all the time hanging out on the corners, and they had the fancy clothes, and they had the fancy cars. And, of course, as a young kid, poor kid, I desired for those things, too. Luckily, I had a strong family who pointed me in another direction. But I have to say that being an Italian-American and investigating organized crime was a challenge for me in many respects, because in my neighborhood, I couldn't exactly go back to my neighborhood and hang around with my friends, because even if they weren't in the mob, they were familiar with a lot of mob characters.
Yeah.
So in that way, it was stressful in that regard. It was that constant stress throughout my career. And then at some point, we had 3 witnesses in protective custody, and I was with those people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And of course, we talked about our lives and the pressure of taking care of people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, keeping them alive took a toll on me as a person. Also took a toll on my family. I was never around.
Right.
And my wife took the brunt of, raising my two daughters while I was 24/7 working on these cases.
Oh, that's the same thing here. And by the way, I always say the departments are run by the spouses. They're really not even run by, and nothing against you, nothing against majors
Right.
and command staff. They're not run by those bosses. They're run by sergeants and their spouses.
Right. And there's that famous saying, those who sit at home and wait also serve.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think a strong foundation for any police officer, and sometimes we see officers get in trouble because they don't have a strong foundation. Luckily, my wife was very independent, and she was able to, raise my daughters, but she deserves all the credit for that. But emotionally, it's just such a stressful situation when you're trying to get a verdict or do an investigation. And I think sometimes we in law enforcement don't understand the toll, that cumulative stress from just doing the job. Yeah, and most of the cumulative stress comes from within the organization.
That's right.
Working in a police department is stressful. Who's going to get promoted? Who's going to go to this school? Who's going to do that? Who's going to do this? And so there's that stress. And then there's the traumatic stress when you go to a scene. I recall in my career going to a triple homicide. So 3 young men were shot while they were working on cars in the driveway of one of the homes. And what is always on my mind is one of the young men who has died was prone on the ground, but his right hand was up over his forehead like he was trying to protect himself from the gunshots. That's one of the things that that I have to deal with, but is with me every day.
I agree. And by the way, I'm talking a little bit about Providence, Rhode Island. There's a series on television, I believe it was Showtime or HBO, one of those a while ago, called Brotherhood. And it was filmed in Providence, Rhode Island, and it really gives a good peek, but it was based loosely off the Winter Hill Gang in Boston, Massachusetts. So the question I'm posing to you is, how realistic was their portrayal of organized crime, number one? And then number two, do you feel that people really don't pay attention to places like Providence and Rhode Island because Massachusetts is so well known for violence and crime?
Well, first of all, I think they did a great job talking about organized crime. And we have to remember in that series, he wasn't Italian, so he wasn't ever able to become a made member of organized crime.
Right.
So there's that difference. But I think for a made member of organized crime, you have a franchise to commit crime. And so, but in regard to the series, I thought they did an excellent job. As you said, it was kind of like moving Whitey Bulger's crew to Providence and how it would go.
It's really what it was. And it's an older series now, but check it out. Some great acting. You'll recognize some of the people involved. And by the way, just as a side note, one of the main characters who played the city councilman, I can't remember his name, he's from England originally. And when he speaks his native tongue, I'm like, that doesn't sound like the guy in Brotherhood.
Yeah. I know. And I've seen him in several other things. And he doesn't have that English accent. And I saw an actor, Hugh Laurie, being interviewed once, and he's from England, and they asked him about the accent. And he said, Americans don't realize what influence they have all throughout the world. So it was easy for them to pick up on the dialogue, or the dialect, excuse me.
The last part of the question before we get a break was, do you sometimes think that people don't give the credit that the Rhode Island police, whatever division they do, that as far as fighting violent crime goes?
I think, actually, I think we get the credit for it. I don't know how much credit we get for practically eliminating the organized crime in Rhode Island. And, of course, Rhode Island organized crime based in Providence actually controls all of New England with a close association to the Genovese crime family.
And by the way, there was no joke. I'm going to cut you off because I have to go to break. This is, we're talking with Anthony Pesare. He's retired major from the Rhode Island State Police, also retired chief of police for Middletown Police Department. He's a professor at Roger Williams University, and he's author of multiple books. Most recent is Back in the Case, and his website is anthonympesare.com.
You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page.
This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. I promise you, we'll be right back.
Don't you hate when they do the bait and switch on you? When they tell you, check out a website, and it's free to go there, and then there's hidden charges? You won't find any of that nonsense at our website, letradio.com. It's free. It's always been free, and it costs you absolutely nothing. There's no hidden tricks. letradio.com. Check it out today. You can find episodes of the show as available as a podcast after airing on radio. They're always free, always have been, and always will be. Again, that's letradio.com, where it's always free.
Return conversation with Anthony M. Pesare. I got to throw that M there. It sounds so classy. It's his middle initial. What does the M stand for, Anthony?
Michael.
I was going to say, I'm of Irish Catholic descent, and I'm John Joseph. So Anthony's not unusual. Michael's not unusual either. His website is anthonympesare.com. His last name is spelled Pesare. Check it out. And his most recent book is Back in the Game. During your career, you had the fortune or misfortune, however you put it, of investigating the mafia, and particularly involving a hit. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I was called up to the intelligence unit, which is a specialized unit of the Rhode Island State Police that primarily at the time that I was there, which was in the late 70s, early 80s, 90s, primarily investigated Italian-American organized crime. While I was up there, and no one accomplishes anything by themselves in law enforcement.
No.
It's always a team effort. So anyway, 3 witnesses came forward, and we took them into protective custody, our own protective custody, because they were going to testify about a mob hit that occurred in 1975, but now in 1983 they were coming forward. So we developed several cases against them. And the struggle for me was the first 2 cases that we brought against this particular mobster. He was a main member of organized crime. The first few cases that were brought were not guilty. And so as timing being what it was, the Attorney General was trying to run for governor. It wasn't working out. He wanted to be tough on the mob, but these cases were falling apart. So I was a young detective at the time, and there was 1 case left. And they said, okay, it's all yours. So I had to go to the stress of having the pressure
which by
of
the
the
way,
last case.
means is we had everybody else take a shot at it, and you got to make something of it.
Yeah. Well, this is a loser, and you're going to be the
right.
loser.
You're going to pay the price for this one.
Yeah, because we always sacrifice our young, right? Even in police work.
Yeah.
And so this the stressor for me was I was young, and I got assigned 2 young prosecutors, and we started investigating this case as if it had never been investigated. It started when a young patrol officer in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, saw some tire tracks in an empty lot. He followed the tire tracks down, saw blood. They found the grave of Dickie Cali. So what happened was Dickie Cali was a made guy, and he was causing problems on the street, and they gave him permission, the mob gave him permission to Bobo Marrapese to shoot him, and he did. And so we worked hard, and we tried to do our best to reinvestigate the case, but also to make sure that it didn't take too much of a toll on us. And what I mean by that is we would work hard, and then we loved to watch the movie Scarface, and we learned the dialogue from it, and it was a way of relieving stress amongst the 3 of us. It was a coping mechanism. Fast forward to almost 3 years after they were brought into protective custody, based on the testimony of Frank Martellucci and Billy Ferrelli reconvicted Frank Bobo Marrapese, a made member, of murder in the case of Dickie Cali. As you know, it's difficult to get a conviction against a made person for a mob hit.
It's tough.
But we were successful. It's tough. It's tough.
And the part about it that's really tough is, and I can only imagine, I never did this. We didn't have an organized crime problem in Baltimore. There's a lot of reasons why, but we didn't have that. We had street gangs, and they posed different styles of threats. But I had Joe Pistone on the show a long time ago. We know him as Donnie Brasco.
Good friend.
And he talks about there's not a whole lot of difference between growing up, in his case, in Paterson, New Jersey, with the influences he had, and the mob life. But and he didn't blur those things. You talked earlier, you grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, Italian-American. This does not represent the vast majority of people, but this is what the image that Hollywood puts out.
Exactly. And so as an Italian American in police work, you're constantly fighting that stereotypes. You're always fighting against that. You always know that's in the background. But as you said, 99% of Italian Americans are hardworking people, but they always have to fight against the stigma, organized crime.
And there's so many movies I love to watch, and I've seen them over. And you mentioned Scarface; that's one of them. The Untouchables is another one with Kevin Costner, and that was. But the other one's Goodfellas, and they portray an image. And listen, there's elements, in my opinion, and uneducated, there are elements that they do represent. However, the vast majority of people in organized crime, in the mafia in particular, are not violent people.
No, I mean, you have to remember the history of Italian Americans in the United States. The majority of them came from southern Italy. And southern Italy has always been repressed by the northern Italians because southern was agricultural. So what happened was, in those areas, men of respect were the people you went to when you needed a job, when you had a beef with a neighbor. And that philosophy came over to the United States. But these men of respect stopped being men of respect and became criminals because they had all the power within the neighborhood.
And so, a lot of them start off as fraternal organizations, as protection organizations.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And it was a way for a common language to be spoken, common concerns, and these groups of people would get together, bars, social clubs, etc. In fact, the murder I investigated of Dickie Cali, the murder actually took place in a social club owned by Bobo Marrapese's father. Now, this was a social club where people were talking, playing cards, and he shot Dickie Cali in the back in the bar with all those people in it. And from 1975 until 83, and those witnesses came forward, no one spoke about it. No one said anything.
Well, there's an old saying, and I'm a tribute to 1% Motorcycle Clubs. I don't know who said it, but the old saying is 3 people can keep a secret as long as 2 of them are dead.
So true. So true. Or you're in such fear of your life because of the person who committed the crime that you keep your mouth shut.
That's the other one, too. But so many of those people wound up getting killed themselves with their witnesses, and they didn't sign up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Whenever a mob figure or even any kind of criminal feels threatened, if they're eyewitness, we've seen retaliations against those people, and it's sometimes a violent reaction, and it's really hard to protect your own mental health as you watch all of these horrific things take place.
We're talking
it's true.
We're talking with Anthony Pesare. He's retired major from the Rhode Island State Police. He's also retired chief of police for Middletown Police Department. He's a professor at Roger Williams University. Author of multiple books. The most recent is called Back in the Game. His website is AnthonyMPesare.com. The last name is spelled Pesare.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. I promise you, we'll be right back.
Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page.
Return our conversation with Anthony M. Pesare. Anthony is retired major from the Rhode Island State Police. He's also retired chief of police for Middletown Police Department. He's a professor at Roger Williams University. He's author of multiple books. The most recent is called Back in the Game. And his website is anthonympesare.com. Last name spelling is Pesare.com. Just do a Google search, Anthony Pesare. I'm sure you will find it. I want to go into the conversation again about the Mafia hit. First of all, investigating a hit that happened 8 years prior is tough because unless you find new evidence, unless you find cooperation or cooperating witnesses that lead to evidence, you're stuck. Mm-hmm. You can know, and I always say this, majority of times we have, as police, we know who committed the crime, but we can't get this thing called evidence for a lot of reasons. And that seems to be one of the biggest downfalls with investigating any kind of mafia or mob-related organized crime hit.
Correct. And in the case of the mob hit, we knew who was dead, and we knew who the witnesses were telling us were involved in it, but that's quite a leap to get from that point to a conviction or probable cause to arrest.
Right.
And so what happened was that I went out and I interviewed. Now, I have to say this because it's true, and I think you'll agree with me, that successful police work is not computers. It's not anything fancy. It's not like CSI where you just put your hand and you can tell where someone is.
Right.
Put your hand on a computer. It's good old-fashioned knocking on doors and talking to people.
That's exactly right. That's not sexy, though.
No, it's not sexy, but it works.
We call it old gumshoe police work. Neighborhood canvas. You talk to people, and you find out, they don't want to be seen talking to police, but they'll call you later, get them a card. They'll give you information later on, and that information has got to lead to something you can corroborate with. A lot of people have the mistaken idea that a witness said this, that the cops just go arrest them.
Yes. In just a quick example, and while investigating Dickie Calley's murder, we found out that who his girlfriend was. So we went to talk to her. And first she didn't want to talk to us, but we went back again. And finally she confirmed that he had been at her apartment and that he told her he was going down to the social club when he left there. So that's just like one piece of evidence that leads to all the circumstances that end up in a conviction. The problem is, for the officer, is you have to be mindful that you want this witness to talk. Maybe they don't want to talk. And it can take a toll on you because you can get frustrated, and that's when policemen make mistakes.
Right.
They get so frustrated and so myopic that all they want to do is get and you can't do that in this day and age, especially when you're investigating an older case. So for me, my governor, so to speak, was the two prosecutors I worked with, my family, that I would talk to, not about the specifics of the case, but about in general the case. Like, I tried to interview this witness, and I would get feedback. Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Or I would get the woman's perspective from my wife, and I would know that and use that knowledge. So it can be frustrating and it can take a toll, especially on an investigation where so much is riding on it, because it was one of the, a prime member of Rhode Island organized crime who was a genuine gangster. He was a real gangster. He wasn't a lollipop gangsters like I see today, and that's what I called them.
Well, first of all, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, a lot of the so-called, and I'm air quoting, tough guys are not tough at all. And they're the first ones to crack. And by the way, I want to dispel this whole thing, anti-snitching. I'll never talk to police. Most people do, especially when they get the hammer of multiple years over their head.
I think the biggest change in regard to organized crime came with the passage of the RICO Act.
Oh, you kidding me?
Yeah, which attacks the organization rather than the individual. There was, when I first started in the early 70s, there was a mobster named Peanuts Broccoli. He was a tiny little man, but he was known for doing the time, never speaking, and he would just go away for 5 years, come back, never said a word to law enforcement. RICO comes along, you sit the same guy down and say, okay, this is what you're looking at, a life bid.
Right.
And boom, they fold like a cheap suit, and you can't shut them up.
No, and that's where hence the term lollipop gangsters comes around. And I'm not saying they were tougher and meaner back in our day, but let's be honest. In your opinion, do you think they were more violent back then than they are today?
Oh, absolutely. His Bobo Marrapese shooting a man right in the middle of his social club. Kevin Hanrahan, who was an associated mob, shot right on the sidewalk of Apples Avenue. Yeah, it was much more violent, many more disputes amongst the families. There were two renegade bookkeepers who were not kicking back to Raymond Patriarca Sr., and they were gunned down in the market on Pecasset Avenue. Yeah. So, yeah, much, much more violent.
And that has an effect on us. And people love to say, that was a long time ago. Yeah, it was a long time ago for me, but I haven't changed. In many ways, I've softened, but I'm still got my head on a swivel when I don't need to have it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I've been retired for a year or two now, but, I still walk into a restaurant.
You're a rookie when it comes to retirement game, Anthony.
Yeah, I am. But actually, I retired. I did 14 years in Middletown Police, and I retired. And for 5 years, I was prosecuting cases, practicing law. And they asked me to come back. And so I came back for 2 years to kind of get the department, set up for my successor. And so, yeah, my daughters say, how many retirement parties do we have to go to, Dad?
Yeah, we got plenty of them. By the way, that's from the old Sopranos line. They just draw me back in. They suck me back in.
Yeah. Every time they think I'm out, they drag me back in.
One of the things that we're running short on time in this segment is that's popular in Hollywood also, we talked about the Mafia quite a bit, is money laundering and task force that investigate money launderers. You did that during your career.
Yeah, I did. I spent 3 years on an FBI task force. It was called Operation Buck Swap. There was a local coin and silver dealer in Cranston, Rhode Island named Steven Sikosha, and he was laundering money for the cartels. And this guy was absolutely brilliant at business. If he had put his efforts to a legal enterprise, he'd probably running a Forbes 500 company.
Right.
But instead he chose to be a criminal. So what would happen is basically the cartels would ship him barrels of cash, and he would have his Smurfs, they're called, people that would go to the bank with $9,999 so they don't trigger the cash reporting transaction that the bank would have to make. Get a money order for that amount, bring it back to Stephen. He would put in his accounts, and then he would transfer them to London, Switzerland, the Caribbean, and back to Colombia. And he would bid on how much he would launder like $1 million for 7% or 6%. And in that enterprise that we investigated, it included feds, local police, state police. What was interesting was there was a mob connection because he was being protected by the underboss of the Providence Mafia, or the New England Mafia. Because one of the ways we gathered evidence, the FBI did, was we bugged his coin place and bugged the phones and listened in on conversations. And one main member of Mafia was approaching him, and so he calls the underboss, and he tells him, hey, so-and-so keeps coming around. And the underboss says, don't worry, I'll talk to him.
No, we're going to take a short break. We're talking with Anthony Pesare. He's retired major from the Rhode Island State Police, also retired chief of police for Middletown Police Department in Rhode Island, and he's a professor at Roger Williams University, author of multiple books, most recently called Back in the Game, and his website is anthonympesare.com. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. I know we've all got lots of apps on our phone, but there's one you should check out, the Medium app, medium.com. And be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast
where you find great articles and blog posts from me on Medium. That's the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Medium app, or you can go directly to medium.com.
Return to conversation with Anthony M. Pesare. Interesting guy. He's a retired major from the Rhode Island State Police. He's chief of police for Middletown Police Department. He's also a professor at Roger Williams University. He's author of multiple books. The most recent is called Back in the Game. And his website is anthonympesare.com. Anthony, before we went to break, we started talking about investigating this money laundering organization. And there's two things that stood out in the conversation. One was, it sounded like it was a mom and pop place. And we've had many people on the show that talk about the little tiny businesses that seem to have more employees. They're doing better than the business they have. You would never think a little shop like that would have the international connections that it did. The other one was you brought up bugging, electronic listening devices. And one of the things, and I'd love to start with that first, is a lot of people in Hollywood gets the idea when you put a bug on someone, at least in Maryland, you can only listen for a period of time. And if they weren't talking about a crime, you had to disconnect.
Yeah, I think that's true in Rhode Island, but that's a wiretap where you're listening to the phones. These were actual microphones inside the building. The FBI has a special team that inserts the bugs, and then you monitor them. So in addition to that, we did surveillances. We would follow the Smurfs. We would follow Steven. We would follow some of the other people involved in the organization. We also put a camera up on a pole because, as you said, it was a mom-and-pop operation because the mob makes its money through cash businesses. They have to launder this money, and how do you do it? You buy a liquor store. You buy a laundromat.
Or the gentleman's club, the strip clubs. Back in the day, before credit cards took a hold and everything.
Right. So wherever there's cash, that kind of business they launder money through. So Stevens' business on Park Avenue was just a one-story wooden building that wouldn't draw anybody's attention, which is exactly what he wanted.
How difficult was it when you say you had a whole team? I have an idea from drug investigation and my experience what it involved, but you got a team monitoring the electronic listening devices and you have a team doing surveillance. About how many people are involved on the police side?
There was at least 12 of us. And as you know, the feds have unlimited resources, so if you needed extra people, we would get extra FBI agents, IRS agents were involved. So that was never really an issue. We had sufficient manpower. We literally rented an apartment nearby so we could do our monitoring. So one of the advantages of the FBI and the feds are the tremendous resources they can put on a particular case.
Manpower-wise, equipment-wise, you name it.
Yeah. And local police, we're basically going from call to call to call, and just don't have the resources in a small department. So this task force was very successful. Steven Sakosha was sentenced to 660 years, and he's still in prison.
That's a long time.
A long time. I remember at the sentencing, his lawyer jumped up after the sentence and said, "Judge, 660 years, how is he supposed to do that?" And she said, "Have him do it one day at a time."
I'm not laughing at his predicament. I'm laughing at the response. One thing I want to ask you, and one of the things I always say, and there's something that Hollywood gets wrong all the time, when we would do a surveillance following people, we'd often have 10 or 12 different vehicles, and we'd have people in front, we'd be in communication, we'd turn off and then come back at the rear. You'd never see the same car behind you more than twice. Was that the case with you guys?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the only way to do it. I know, like, if you did a stationary surveillance, you're sitting in the car. I always used to sit in the passenger seat.
Right.
Because if you see someone in the driver's seat, you might think there's something suspicious. You move over one seat and someone thinks, oh, you're just waiting for somebody. So, yeah, there are techniques, as you know, but it's hard to do. It's not like television where they're like right behind the car and nobody notices them. It's handoff, as you said, from different vehicles. It's getting up ahead. Many times the best surveillance is when you know where they're going.
Right.
So if we would hear Stephen hand money to one of the Smurfs, take this to citizens, well, we knew from that pattern exactly what citizens he was going to. But you had to document it by doing the surveillance.
That's
and
right.
again, that gets back to that good old-fashioned police work.
So I wanted to shift gears very quickly. You got into writing books, and your most recent one is Back in the Game. I think you said you've got 2 books. What prompted a guy like you to do this?
Well, when we got the conviction of Frank Marrapese, I said, there's a story here, and I wanted to write it. So I didn't want to do it as true crime because I wasn't going to sift through transcripts and that sort of thing. And I wouldn't have the opportunity to do what I did, which was take my upbringing and my experiences and write about those, my experiences going to the State Police Training Academy, being in uniform, and then get into detectives. So the first book, They Always Win, kind of traces that, and then it ends up at the end with the conviction of Marrapese. Now the second book picks up from that point, and I talk about what it's like to be in the witness protection program and what it's like to be in law enforcement. And quite often we realize that they're both very much alike in many respects. Yeah. Police officers want to get promoted. I think we've talked about this, but police officers want to be promoted. They want the notoriety. A lot of them do. They want the power and that sort of thing, and so do mobsters. And it was funny to have those guys in protective custody. I think they learned as much about us as we did about them. And one of the funny things was that towards the end, when they were testifying, they were started to testify like cops. Like I saw the subject, we're like, whoa, so it was like a role reversal thing. But yeah, absolutely.
Another place that really matters is in court. And there's a different scenario.
Exactly.
When we tell stories about what we went through, rarely does it sound like what we do in court. It's just a totally different style of conversation. And by the way, as a witness, as a police officer, and called to testify in court, say you call to testify the prosecutor usually, you know ahead of time from conversations, this has not been introduced. And you just wait your turn and answer yes, no. You don't give a lot of information until they open the door.
Right. Yeah, I remember testifying once in a drug case where I had found the drugs by kicking the panel of the wall and the drugs fell out. And so the defense attorney was questioning me about, my search techniques and something like that. And then, so I saw my opportunity to say how I found the drugs. He objected, and the judge said, "Hey,
you asked him.
You opened the door. You opened the door. He just drove the truck through it."
And ruined your whole... Man, yeah. I could go back and say many, many times the judge goes, well, you asked him. He answered.
Yeah, exactly.
It's allowed. Yeah. We're going to continue. So your website, AnthonyMPesare.com. Can people find information about you, your books? Can they get in touch with you there?
Yep. There's a way to purchase the books right from the website. There's a way I like to go around and talk about organized crime. I have a presentation. If you want me to come, no charge for law enforcement or colleges, university, I'll come and be more than happy to talk about that. I've had a great deal of success working with the people I did in my career, and also now my sort of second career of writing books. So two in the done, and I'm working on the third right now.
And by the way, the thing about writing books that I tell a lot of people is remember who your audience is. Talk to them. Talk to them on their level. You don't assume they know what you know. So It's a great conversation. Anthony, we have a little bit of time left. I got to change. First of all, this is a conversation I had with Joe Pistone. That I miss, and my family, when they immigrated from Ireland, they settled in northern Jersey, New York, that whole area, and it was very ethnically divided. We loved going to visit. I've been watching this comedian lately. I can't pronounce his last name, Sebastian Maniscalco, and it just tears me up when he talks about the old school way of doing things.
Yeah, having the Edmonds ready. People would just drop by.
Yeah. About having the horn from the mirror in case someone gives you the eye. Oh, my God.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I've seen him in person once.
Oh, people should check him out. Anthony, make sure you go to his website, anthonymPesare.com. First of all, thanks for your service in both the Rhode Island State Police, Middletown Police Department, and also being a teacher, which we'll talk about a different day, and also being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
John, thank you very much for this opportunity. I love talking about this stuff, and I really, really appreciate you having me on.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.